Hello fellow hidden artists, welcome to the second tutorial of these hidden artist tutorials. In this tutorial I'm going to explore the canvas. So this is where you actually do your painting. And to get to the canvas we just select a painting that we want to paint. I've already added in this tutorial painting that we can do. And this is a very simple painting. It really comprises of black background, a multicolored ring in the middle, and then a bar with some gradient across it. And this will allow me to talk about the different methods that you can use to do your painting. Before we get there though, I just want to quickly talk about the navigation within this painting. So there's a few buttons on the top button bar. There is a arrow over here which just simply allows you to go back to the gallery. This allows you to do an undo, so if you've done a brush stroke and you don't like it, just click there, it goes away. Over here on the top right hand side is your normal hamburger menu type icon, and that will give you some options to do about sharing the painting. So now we are going to, not sure why I have that there. So now we can get into painting. But to paint we have to navigate within the canvas itself. And it's very important to be able to adjust where you are. You need to zoom in to do some details. You need to zoom out to see the picture as a whole. So it's pretty straightforward. I mean, using a touch screen, everyone's used to this. Put your fingers down, stretch to zoom in, pinch to zoom back out. And of course, just putting two fingers down and dragging around will allow you to move it around. Now you might be just using one finger, or you might have your stylus and you want to do that. So there is a double click option here, so you tap tap and hold, and you can drag it. You can tap tap tap, tap tap tap, and then up and down is to zoom. So if you are holding your iPad with one hand and you have a stylus and you just don't want to somehow maneuver your two fingers there to move it around, you can do that. So remember, it's tap tap to move, tap 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 to zoom. And okay, so let's get in to do some drawing. So how does this work? When you put down either your finger or the stylus on the screen, what it will do is find the color at that spot from a picture that's behind the scenes. So a picture that's been imported by you or one of the hidden artists bundled pictures will sample, and it's not just one color. If you see this brush stroke, there's a length of it here, and it will sample all the way along that length and have multiple colors for each bristle of the brush. And you can't see that now over here in the black, but if you move over to where there's a difference in color, you'll see as I drag here that that brush is getting red over here and black over here. And if I drag the brush, so it's collected those colors here, but if I drag it out over here, you can see that it will slowly lose it. It's just like you painted from some wet color of paint here, and you painted it into some kind of wet black over here if you were doing it in real life. And that's a intentional effect of hidden artists. And it lets you do certain effects to make it look a bit more like a painting. But certainly there's times where you do not want to bleed one color into the other one. And so the way to do that is to always, in those cases, paint along the lines of contrast, I call it. And so the contrast is from one color to another color. Even here you see there's a little white line in the middle of it. And if you do it well, you'll just get a nice crisp line. Now it might be further complicated if this red color were changing as you go along. Then you'd be dragging one red into the next color, and so on. And you might have to zoom in further if you don't want that effect. But for this, we want a nice crisp line, so I'll just paint just along that edge. As you can see right now, I'm using a stylus. You can definitely paint with a finger, and you can do very crisp things with a finger as well. The one big difference though is that with a stylus, the angle of the brush comes from the stylus. If I paint it like this, you'll get the brush up and down, if you can see that the end of it. And if I go like this, the brush is this way. And if I paint this way, it doesn't change the angle of that brush. So it gives you more control over the thickness of it. However, with a finger, the angle of the brush will always follow the direction of movement. So you can see on the left-hand side of the screen capture how that angle will change as I move it around. It will sort of lag your finger's direction a little bit because it needs to see a few movements before it knows what direction you're going. So it'll always be a little bit behind if you're changing direction, but not too much, and I think it works well. And again, with the stylus, you have more control, but at the same time, you might find you have to move your hand around or even turn the iPad, which again is fine. However, if you have a stylus, you can always just use your finger for certain times and then use your stylus for other times. The other difference between a finger and a stylus is the width of the brush. For a finger, the width of the brush is always the same. If you want it to change, well, you can't really change the width, but you can change the effect on the painting by zooming in and out. Where here, that brush is, again, it's the same width in relation to the screen of the iPad, but on the painting, that was much wider than these earlier ones when I was zoomed in. So you can zoom in a lot to get very fine details, or zoom out and get wider areas of color at once. Sometimes you do want to fill in an area that has no variation in color, and it's much easier to do with you zoomed all the way out. So that's the finger, a fixed brush width. Whereas with the stylus, if you hold it on an angle like this, you get a thickish brush width, and if you hold it up like this, so it's just the tip, you'll get a much thinner one. So it gives you a bit more flexibility in painting some details, or if you wanted to do a few squiggles or something, or get it, bring out a few little hairs that might be on a face or mustache or something. You can do it with the tip of your stylus rather than zooming all the way in and using your finger. However, you can do extremely detailed and fine paintings with just your fingers, so don't feel you have to run out and buy a stylus if you don't want one. However, if you do have a stylus, this is a great use of it. So let's just talk about, again, getting this circle done. So, for a big circle like this, and I'll use my finger here to demonstrate that it's possible, you need to have patience. You can see that's a pretty nice crisp line there. If you were to drag kind of fast and sort of not very carefully, you'll see a lot of bleeding of color in and out. And the amount of color you get is a little bit diminished as you drag fast. Even dragging slowly, though, you will need to go over each part of your painting multiple times. When you sample the color and paint, you're only getting about 50% of that color. And you will have to pull it multiple times to make it nice. And I think you need to do that anyway, just to crisp it up. Your first one should be a little bit faster and a bit more rough, and then you zoom in and you kind of clean it up a bit afterwards. You might find it's easier if you rotate the iPad so you're kind of pulling rather than trying to push it at some weird angle for you. That's up to you. You might find it not too hard to do the push on an angle thing and still get straight lines. And so just, I like to think of it when I'm painting as caressing it. Just caressing this line. You don't push hard on the screen, just drag it lightly. If you put a lot of pressure on the screen, you'll find your finger kind of binds up on it. You don't want that. You just want it to be nice, light, gentle massage of the screen. There, so we've gone around that. That's fine. I'll use my stylus again. I can color in this area back and forth. The stylus gives you one other advantage in that you can push harder on it and it will give you a darker color, a deeper, not so much a darker color I should say, but it's that kind of amount of color that it will paint on the first pass is higher if you push harder. So this interior is a different color again. And again, you'd want to just slowly work it around and draw it in. And again, it's not essential that you make this thing look photorealistic. You might want a little bit of roughness on these edges to give it more of a painting feel. And personally, I prefer a little bit of, I don't know if I call it sloppiness, but at least visible brush strokes. So we can do that. So this top set of concentric circles is just black, and and then you have red and yellow. There's no variation of color in the middle there. However, this bar down here is a bit more complicated. If we just zoom out and paint right across it, we can kind of get a feel of what it is. And what it is a gradient across from yellow to red. And if I just do it very roughly, you can sort of see what happens. You drag colors. I'm pulling the black into the yellow at the start, and then the yellow gets pulled into the red. And then at the end of it, where it goes to black again, you're pulling it out of the boundary. So what you want might vary painting to painting, but if you wanted this to look as close to its natural color as possible, first you have to worry about getting these edges clean. And I'll zoom in to show you corners of high contrast are a little bit of work. Because if you're coming along to the end, and you go to the corner, you drag a little bit of stuff off the end. And the same thing if I go this way. And so that's not a very crisp corner here, obviously. And so then there's a few different ways to worry about that. Probably the easiest way to correct for it is just to paint on the outside. Try not to hit that higher or the lighter color, and just paint away those extra little streaks that came out of it. And we'll do that. And the same thing in here, you can paint along in that direction. And just try not to overshoot. And then you'll get what is a fairly crisp line here. It may not look that crisp when we're zoomed all the way in here, but as you zoom out, you will see that it's quite crisp. And again, it's not necessarily that you want perfection here. It's a painting. And very few artists strive for exactness and complete photorealism. You know, we have cameras, you can take a picture. So I will just get this guy. Once you get good, it doesn't take you too long to get these fairly crisp edges. Sometimes you just have to come along, clean it up a little bit at the end. That's pretty good. So there's the corners at the start. Now, when you're dealing with gradients, and this is something you will encounter quite a lot, maybe you're painting a cheek or the edge of a face, and it's going from a light to a dark fairly quickly. You can paint towards like light to dark or dark to light, and as long as you're consistent, you start at the same place and you pull to the same place in subsequent strokes, you'll get something that looks fairly natural, where you see a gradual change from a yellower color to an oranger color. But if you do it like this, you pull this way, and then you pull this way, and then you pull this way, and then you pull this way, you get this sort of thing, which maybe you want, maybe it's your style, but you might not. So it's important that if you're painting along a gradient, that you do all your strokes in a similar length, starting at a similar spot, so that you don't get that stark variation between strokes. Alternatively, you can paint across the path of the gradient. And in this case, just because your paintbrush consists of multiple bristles that are taking different colors samples along this path, is going to, even across the width of your paintbrush, have that gradient across it. And so if you paint it this way, you'll get, in this particular case, a much truer version of what's there. In fact, this is the real color that came from the image below, whereas when you dragged across, it would have tended to be a bit more yellow because you're pulling that yellow into it, and you're shuffling, you're moving the lightness down the path. So anyway, again, it depends on what you want. In this case, I'm trying to get it to be as close to the actual image behind as I can, so I can just paint over in this direction. And I think it'll work well. Now this is funny. Like, you can paint a face with all of its sort of nooks and crannies, probably even faster than painting this thing, because the imperfections in this example are so much more stark when you have a little bit of black into the yellow and when the gradient's not perfect, whereas most of the face is much more forgiving. Even doing this along the edge is sort of tricky because it's a constant gradient, you get a little bit of a difference here, so you might have to pull away, clean it up. Alright, anyway, so that gives you an example of a little bit of what you can do within the canvas. All of the color comes from that image, and it is all picked up by the brush when you put it down first, and it gets changed as you go along. As you paint along, it's constantly picking up more color and blending it into what was there before. And if you do it carefully, you can come up with crisp edges, crisp corners, gradients, and at the end, hopefully a beautiful picture. This one is obviously not that beautiful. It's a big mess. But I think you get the feeling of what you can do. And that's about it for this tutorial. So thank you very much for watching this, and I hope that you have some great success in your hidden artist paintings. Goodbye for now.